Hey guys, Sean Strong here from the Masculine Mission. Glad to be back with you again. Okay, it's Wisdom Wednesday, and we're going to be in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 34. Now, that same proverb, though, was quoted in James 4:6. So I'm going to spend my time in James 4:6 because I've kind of built a little bit of a teaching around it, and it's easier to go there. And this is the way James 4:6 reads. It says that God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And this has been a scripture that in my own life, it's been one that I've held on to for a whole bunch of years. One, it's easy to memorize. It's short, just my style. The other thing is because I found it to be so relevant throughout all of these years, because over and over again, I find myself in these situations where I'm having to make a decision. And that is, Sean, do you want to be proud and go toe to toe with God? Or do you want to choose the humble path and be able to receive his grace? So let's talk a little bit, though, about what James is speaking of specifically in this scripture. And we're going to unpack this a little bit and look at it more broadly as a principle. But right now, James has been talking to the readers or whoever is going to hear this about how being friends with the world and adapting its value system is going to make them an enemy of God. But the good news is that God's willing to extend his grace toward us. And this is what we see again in 4:6. He said, listen, in your battle, in your struggle against adapting the world's ways, God opposes the proud, but he will give grace to the humble. That the Lord is willing to give you grace if you're willing to humble yourself. But as I read this, it kind of struck me, if I'm really wanting to do things God's way and not the world's, why would I be proud? Why would somebody be proud in that? It seems like it's just kind of antithetical. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Who would be proud in this case? And so I thought, well, maybe that pride might point to a sense that a person is self-sufficient somehow, or that they don't need God. But I don't guess that's where he was going with this at all. My guess is James is saying, listen, there's not enough of a battle going on. He wouldn't be writing this letter and saying, listen, guys, if you're going to be a friend of the world, it's going to make you an enemy of God. I think that there's been a problem, and that's what he's been addressing, or he's going to address. Because check it out, James, the beginning of chapter 4, he starts out, what a nice way to greet people. He's 4 chapters in, but still, he calls them an adulterous people, meaning that they're in trouble already. He's calling out this idea that either they're in this process of adultery, which we'll talk about in a second, or they just have a proclivity or a tendency to chase after things they shouldn't be chasing after. Because in spiritual terms, being an adulterous people always refers to chasing after idols or other gods, things like that. Honestly, going our own way is not going God's way, right? So it's really anything that is not going after God is going to put us in this category of being an adulterous person if we're a Christian. So the readers or the hearers are submitting themselves to a God, that's true, but it was the God of this world. That's why he's saying, listen, you've got to stop this. You can't be friends with the world and the world's value system. Why? Because that's another God that you're chasing after. It's just a God of self. It's the God of this world. And from verse 1 through 12, he's been calling out that, listen, the reason I'm saying this is because I can see it in your behaviors. You guys are quarreling, you're fighting, you're coveting, you're slandering. And James is saying that is not the way of God. You are chasing after the world system. You become a friend with the world because you're acting just like the world, is where he was going with that. You see, the pride that he writes of is this pride that people were choosing their own way over God's way. The admonition to submit to God comes with a promise, though, and that is that those who humble themselves will receive grace, enabling grace. Enabling grace to, what is it enabling you to do? To resist sin. It's enabling grace to resist the enemy and to walk in God's freedom. He's saying it doesn't have to be this way. God is going to give you grace if you choose the way of humility. But we also see a broader principle here, which is where I want to spend the remainder of our time. That aside from what James is speaking to specifically about chasing the world or going the way of the world or becoming a friend of the world, beside that, there's a broader principle, and I see this, and that is that in God, we're free to choose our own path. So here's the story. A couple weeks ago, I live here in Colorado, and just before Mother's Day, this is not unheard of, it's not completely uncommon, just for Mother's Day, we'll often have a heavy snow, which is bizarre to think of getting snow in May, but that's the way it is here. So we had a heavy snow, probably 6 or 7 inches, and man, this is disaster at that time of year for us because by that time, early May, our trees are already in full bloom. So they're full of leaves, and now typically what happens because it's a late winter winter snow, that snow always comes in heavy and wet. If it's in May, you got grief. And so what's going to end up happening is, because the trees are in full leaf, it catches every bit of the snow, and then add on top of that, the snow is wicked heavy, super, super heavy. And what ends up happening is that those trees, because they've caught so much snow, so much weight, they will bend over to absurd angles. It's amazing how much they'll do. They will bend under the weight of the snow. But there's some other branches that are not able to hang. And because of their lack of flexibility, they get overcome by the weight, and then it's just like a big bang, you'll hear it pop. They'll snap violently, and then the whole branch, sometimes, dude, they could be 3 inches even, but that branch is not able to flex anymore, and it falls off. And so as I walked out and looked at all my branches, of course, I'm out there in the morning and other times trying to shake as much snow as I could off the trees to relieve some of the weight. As I went out there, man, and saw those branches bending, I thought about this James 4:6, and it's something, again, I've talked to a lot of guys about often over the course of years. I was reminded about this idea that God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. And I see it this way. See, you and I can kind of choose how we'd like to go in life in many cases. In our life with God, in our relationship with God and the world and everything else, and our own self-will, in those relationships, either we can choose to bend, or in our stubbornness, we can insist on being broken. See, the truth is, man, we need to check our pride, get humble and choose God's way, or go toe-to-toe with God. Because it said God opposes the proud. Listen, if you want to choose your own proud way, if you want to get stubborn, stiff-necked, fine. You're going to go toe-to-toe with God. Why? Because God opposes the proud, man. He does. And so it's so helpful, again, for myself or for guys that I know, or sometimes kids, who knows what, to ask ourselves, well, which way do you want it? Man, I spent a bunch of years in the military, and even outside of that, other guys will relate to this, but there are times where I put that to, that same type of an idea of, we have a situation, you get to determine how this goes. You choose. Do you want to go the hard way? You want to go the easy way? Because here's the thing, as Christian guys or Christian gals, if they're listening, again, this is not a masculine focused message, but no matter who we are, if we're Christians, Hebrews 12:6 says that God disciplines those whom he loves. And in his kindness, he doesn't want to let us go off and do things that are going to hurt ourselves. But if God's going to discipline those whom he loves, man, I think that we have some choice about what that looks like. And for me, I've always teased about this. I'm an Air Force guy. I don't want to do anything the hard way. I want to be a good son, man. I don't want God to have to take a 2x4 to my head to get my attention. I want to go the easy way as much as I can. I'd rather spend my energy doing something else than just going through suffering that was really unnecessary. And if you have kids, you'll understand this. A kid that is willing to cooperate with you will be met with a lot more understanding and patience, even when they've goofed up. That's the way you would see it with your own kids. If they have a decent attitude, they're willing to accept their stuff, they're willing to learn, you're going to be a lot more gracious. But then on the other hand, a stubborn and rebellious kid may have a very different experience. If that's the way that they want to go, they're just going to have to choose it. There was a song years ago by DC Talk that went like this. It's called The Hard Way. It says, some people got to learn the hard way. I guess I'm the kind of guy that's got to find out for myself. I had to learn the hard way. And that's so telling, man. We have choices to make. I'm not saying that we can control it all, because there are times where, as a Christian person, listen, not everything that happens to us comes to us because God's, spanking us on the butt or something. Not everything is that kind of discipline. There are hard things that come in the life of a Christian. They don't have to do with your disobedience at all. Sometimes it's because the world's broken. You go through a hard time. Sometimes God will allow you to go through things or use things even that the enemy is bringing your way, because he knows that it's going to condition something inside your own heart and your own soul. And this is Romans 8:28 and 29. It says, and we know this, that God will use all things for our good to those that love God and are called according to his purpose, because those whom he foreknew, he predestined to be conformed into the image of his Son. So some of the hard things that come toward us, God will use. Why? Because he's conforming us into the image of Jesus with his kind of faith, with his kind of strength, with his kind of character, with his kind of humility. So not everything that's hard comes to us because we're in trouble. But in this particular context and in this principle, I'm talking about stubbornness, man. I'm talking about things where you have choices to make. I have a choice to make, the hard way or the easy way. And it's not likely that we're going to face such clear choices or situations like that very often. We're not going to often come into that clear, stark, here's here's your toe against or over the line thing. Oftentimes it's not going to be like that. But on the other hand, we may. See, the problem can be that we may not have a clear sense about those types of situations. We might miss them or write them off because we don't see going our own way as rebellion. And so we get so accustomed to kind of, again, tiptoeing over the line. We get so accustomed to not being all that obedient that we're not aware that every time we're making a decision, that it's bigger than just some little thing as you view it. We are often choosing our way or his way. And so we might see those types of decisions more often than we realize. But once again, it could be going under the radar because we're in a rut, man, where our eyes just really aren't open to what's really going on. Sometimes some of what we feel is a small decision or a small little fudge or a sin, we don't always see it for what it really is. And that is, dude, when you're choosing your own way, it's rebellion. Well, what I hope is more and more that we will become aware of those things, and the choice between the easy way or the hard way, we'll begin to see it. Where I will recognize, listen, I have an option here to choose to bend and go God's direction and choose humility, or recognize that if that's not the way I choose, and what I'm doing is I'm choosing the hard way. I'm choosing to hold on to my pride. I'm going to go my direction and then force God's hand into doing something that is potentially a lot more difficult and harmful. And all sometimes because of our stubbornness. And man, this can be a game changer when we recognize that our own stubbornness, our own whatever, again, is not just some small thing. So you think about that scripture, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. As I've said to many men, I would say to you right now, hey, listen, you choose. Right? In your life, may we be the kind of men that hear this more often. Hey, listen, God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. You choose. Which way do you want this to go? You have an option. You're fully in control of how you would like to see this thing go as it applies to your decisions. How do you want it to go? You choose. And God will sit back and say, let me know when you're ready. That is helpful oftentimes to recognize we have choices to make. It's helpful to push us the right direction. Because guys, we don't get it all right. And I don't intend to make this out as if every single choice in life is one we have to wring our hands over and sweat over. I'm not trying to say that. But rather what I do want us to do is just be aware that we have choices and that those choices have consequences for great good or sometimes for discipline. Man, may the bent of our heart, right? May the consistent, even if it's not the perfect direction, be that we lean easily into God's ways. May the bent of our heart be that we choose humility, that we choose to walk as sons who are uninterested in going toe to toe with their father. Because really, how's that going to go? For you, for me, it doesn't matter. Listen, how is it going to go for any person that chooses in their own stubbornness and rebellion to go toe to toe with their father? How's that going to work out? With the God of the universe, listen, we don't want to be men that are standing in opposition to God because we have our fist up. We want to be men that say, you know what, Lord? Yeah, I would rather do it your way. And the scripture says this in James 4:6. Well, it says, God opposes the proud, but what? But he gives grace to the humble. As I choose his way, and I say, Father, I do want to go your way. I don't want to fight you. I want to be a good son, meaning I want to be a son that you don't have to discipline that way, that we will experience his enabling grace more and more and more. What? To walk in the way that he wants us to walk in the freedom that he wants us to be able to say no more and more to the world. Guys, how do we want it? And I would say that if we find that the bent of our heart is one that leans into humility, leans into going God's way, that we are going to experience a life now and later. We're going to experience a life now and later that has got a lot more blessing to it. And I want us to recognize this, that as fathers, if you're a father, if you're a husband, man, the things that you and I do, we don't bear all those consequences alone. There are aspects where if you choose to get proud and you get fired from your job, who else suffers? Your family. You get uppity, or if I do something stupid, I drink too much, I do whatever else, who else suffers? It's not just between you and God. Your whole family, man, is going to end up having or being impacted at least in some way. And we saw this in the life of King David. King David goes out, commits adultery with Bathsheba. He admits to the sin and everything else. But man, there was hell that was unleashed throughout the rest of his life. There were still consequences that didn't impact just him. So that is just a little other added piece. So what's another reason that you and I as dads and as fathers and husbands want to be guys that are willing to go God's way? Because if you experience discipline in your own life because of your own stubbornness, because of your lack of humility, that you won't be the only one that feels the effects of these things. Your family may as well. And then the last part will be, how does your family see you? And how does your wife see you? Does she see you as a guy that, I hope she sees you as a guy with strength, but does she also see you as a guy with humility that's willing to go God's way when he's faced with a decision? That's a big, big deal, man. I hope my wife sees me that way. I hope that I'm able to be a guy that she is willing to follow. Hopefully, I'm being a man that she can admire. Why? Because she sees me leaning into God's direction when I'm faced with a choice. I'm not saying I do it all perfectly, but man, I want my family, I want my kids, I want my grandkids to be able to see and follow my example, and that is I'm a guy that's not stubborn, guy that's not difficult, not to be a guy that insists on having to get a 2x4 upside the head before I'll get the message. I want them to be able to see something in me that they're willing and able to follow, and that is to be people that are humble so that we can receive the grace of God rather than being the knucklehead that thinks he can go toe-to-toe with God and come out winning. Let me know if that ever works out for you, Anyway, guys, listen, hey, I love you. I hope you have a great day, and I hope we get a chance to connect again soon.